I wanted to share this recipe with you guys right before that first fall frost hit because this is one of my favorite ways to preserve a bunch of hot peppers at the end of the season. I apologize, I didn't get that done, but hopefully some of you growing in other areas can use this or save the recipe to try out next year. Now, this is a quick and easy fermented hot sauce, and don't let the fermentation process scare you. It is very, very easy, and hot peppers in particular are easy to do a traditional ferment with. So let me show you guys how to make what might be the best hot sauce you've ever had. I like to start with freshly picked peppers, and as I mentioned, this is my go-to method of using up a bunch of peppers before that frost hits, so I typically use whatever I have in the garden. For the hot sauces I'm making here, you'll see a mix of Thai, Santa Fe or Caribe, jalapeno, and sweet bullhorn type peppers. You can adjust the pepper mix to your personal flavor palette and heat tolerance. One of my all-time favorites for this recipe is a variety called Ají Rico, which is an early ripening baccatum type with moderate heat and a citrusy flavor. In addition to your mix of peppers, you'll need enough to fill a quart mason jar chopped. You'll also need 1 to 2 tablespoons of salt, the optional addition of garlic to taste. I typically use 5 to 6 large cloves per quart jar. You also need a quart mason jar and some type of fermentation weight to keep your pepper mix submerged in the brine while it ferments. The first step is to roughly chop your peppers and garlic. You can remove the seeds and midribs from the peppers for less heat or leave them in for more heat. Chop enough to fill a quart mason jar, loosely packed. I like to add some sweet peppers in the mix for flavor, but that's totally optional. Next, sprinkle 1 to 2 tablespoons of sea salt over your pepper garlic mix. At least 1 tablespoon of salt is needed for the fermentation process. You can add more salt to taste. Using 2 tablespoons of salt will yield a very salty hot sauce. Next, fill the jar to just above the pepper mix with distilled water. Leave an inch of headspace in the jar as you'll need room for the weight, and as the mix starts to ferment, it will begin to bubble, and if you fill the jar too full, it will bubble over. Now add your fermentation weight. The purpose of the weight is to keep all of your vegetables submerged in the brine. Otherwise, if they're not submerged and are exposed to the air, they will begin to rot and form mold, which you do not want. You can buy fancy fermentation weights, but my go-to is just cutting a chunk of onion large enough to cover the surface of the jar and wedging it in, pushing all the peppers beneath it. I've used onion to submerge any number of ferments, and they do a great job. Their natural antimicrobial properties keep them from getting moldy and gross. In the past, I've also used a small Ziploc filled with water or brine, but I like the onion better. Put a lid loosely on the jar, write the date, and now we wait. The fermentation process typically takes 5 to 10 days, though it will depend on how warm your house is. In a very warm home, your peppers could be ready in as little as 3 days. In a very cold one, up to 2 weeks. As reference, my home's average temperature is around 67 degrees Fahrenheit, and I let these guys ferment for right around 8 days. You'll also want to be sure to burp your jars once a day, which is just opening the lid enough to let the gas bubbles out and then putting the lid back on loosely. To know when your pepper mix is done fermenting, you can use a couple of key indicators. The first and most obvious is that you'll see the formation of bubbles, usually beginning to occur around about 3 days. The next indicator is that your mix will take on a pleasing aromatic scent. Fragrance, if you will, eau de pepper. This mix will be pungently peppery, but you'll also pick up a slight sour note, indicative that the fermentation process is running smoothly. And finally, taste. Once bubbling occurs, give your mix a taste daily. Once it hits the level of sourness that you find pleasing, you can call the process done. Please note, if your mixture ever has a rotten or foul smell or develops a layer of scummy looking mold on top, don't eat it and just throw it away and start over. After the fermentation period is complete, it's time to make the hot sauce. Grab a large bowl and dump the contents of your jar into the bowl. Then, using a stick or immersion blender, blend the mixture until the peppers form a rough pulp. You could actually stop at this step and have a chunkier, runny, salsa-like condiment. But for hot sauce, I dump the liquid and pulp into a fine sieve and strain the liquid into a glass jar. I use a spoon to mash the pulp down into the sieve, ensuring that I squeeze all the liquid out. Once all the liquid has been strained out, you can either save the pulp to add some spice to recipes or compost it. Put an airtight lid on your jar of hot sauce and move to the fridge for long-term storage. So there we have it, some beautiful fermented hot sauce. You can see that this is going to vary in color depending on the mixture of peppers that you put in. And that's the really wonderful thing about this. You can totally customize it to your heat tolerance based on the mix that you put into this. So the ultimate test, let's give this a taste. Now that's my mild one. Just a little bit of heat, but a lot of peppery garlic flavor coming through on that one. This one, I'm a little scared of, honestly, but it's, oh, it smells hot. Ooh. Oh yeah. That will set your pants on fire. Oh man, that is good though. Whew. That'll clear the old sinuses right up. So to store these, I just pop a lid on them and throw them back in the refrigerator. Now, if you happen to have a root cellar that stays quite cool, you can keep fermented foods like this without having refrigeration. I don't currently have an area that stays cold enough to do that, so the fridge works best for me. You can also can this hot sauce. It's just that the process of canning and the heat will kill off any good bacteria that is formed during the fermentation process. And I like to keep that, so I just stick with refrigeration. So I'd love to hear from you guys. If you give this recipe a try, definitely let me know what you think. And if you have a favorite hot sauce recipe, definitely drop a line in the comments below. I'd love to hear what your recipe is. And for more recipes like these on preserving the garden harvest, as well as tips, tricks, and lessons learned in my own garden, please consider subscribing to my channel, Growfully with Jenna. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.